What is the strongest each tribe has ever been? It's been 6 years since the game's release, and we've seen the rise and fall of hundreds of strategies. In this video, I'll be going tribe by tribe and talking about the comp behind each tribe's absolute peak. What I mean by strongest is the tribe's strength relative to the other tribes in the game at the time. Think Tier S, the big Goliath versus the little Davids. Answering the question this way, as opposed to simply looking for each tribe's biggest numbers, allows us to look back at some of the strategies that once excelled and have since been lost to time. Let's start with Elementals. The strongest era ever for Elementals is the Nomi Little Rag era, right around the time they were both first introduced in late 2020. If you go back and look at these cards in the wiki, you'll see an absurd amount of balance changes that these cards went through, several of which were to tone down this initial power level. The way this worked was quite simple. If you had a Nomi in play and a Little Rag, anytime you played an Elemental, you would both buff the Tavern of Elementals through Nomi, as well as buffing a friendly Elemental through Little Rag. In this particular way, compared to Major Domo and the Crackling Cyclone from before, instead of just buffing a key minion on the left, you are buffing any potential Elemental on your board and future Elementals in the shop. Essentially twice as much scaling. While I'm sure many of you aren't strangers to the Chef Nomi Battleground strategy, or even the times where it was combined with Little Rag, what many may not remember is that in this time frame, one of the crucial reasons this comp was so good is because you didn't need to level up and hit high late game minions that were crucial for your strategy. Sure, hitting a Gentle Genie was awesome, but it was economy or the extra elemental on top that was the tier 6 card, not the straight up scaling card itself. Saying that sounds crazy because nowadays, hitting something like the tier 6 pirate isn't just an economy booster cherry on top, but rather downright required to keep up. But back then, not just the stats were more tame, but so were the economy giving options. So the fact that for this Nomi strategy, you didn't need a tier 6 minion at all was quite significant for the time. You could just spam cards like Tavern Tempest and Elemental to buff your board and your shop, leading to a bigger board than anything was capable of competing with at the time. Elementals are a great tribe to really drill down why we're not just looking for when each tribe was capable of making the biggest numbers, and as a result, likely the best board the tribe's ever been capable of. Because the answer for that, for most tribes, including Elementals, would likely be the current season, or the current season minus a nerf patch or two, which in the case of Ellie's was when they were able to condense all of their stats onto a minion that made copies of itself, or something like Blanchy with pirates, etc. When every tribe's numbers are tuned to the max, it's not actually telling us much about its gap over the competition. But something that you'll learn about games if you played them for long enough is that whenever you add a new character, a new champion, a new tribe in this case, whatever it may be, you generally aim as a designer, as a balancer, to have it release a little bit stronger than everything else so that you can get increased data on it. You can have players excited to play it. You can see people play it in mass faster because, well, it wins. And so if your goal is to have something be a little bit stronger than everything else and you miss the mark a little bit, oftentimes that happens. You end up releasing something that is not just a little bit better, but is way better than everything else. And that's kind of what happened here with the Elemental tribe. It have massive minions that other tribes just could not keep up with. Up next, Quillbore. Quillbore is a tribe that revolves around Blood Gems, a spell that gives a minion +1/+1. Various different Quillbores buff the Blood Gem stats, so instead of giving +1/+1, it gives more stats. Other Quillbores help you play Blood Gems on your minions. Regardless of the Quillbore strategy in question, it generally revolves around Blood Gems in some way. This feels like a good time to mention that for the sake of being able to do this video right, we are mostly only focused on single tribe strategies. If you have 4 Quillbore and 3 Beast, for example, are you Beast? Are you Quillbore? Well, you're both. So I wouldn't include it on this list. So if the claim is that the best Quillbore comp of all time is Leapfrogger plus Blood Gems, for example, I'm not really interested in that, as I consider Leapfrogger to be a beast comp for this video's purposes. I mention this for that aspect, but also because I think it's really sweet that the current balance in Battlegrounds allows people who are not at the top to have fun by just jamming tribes and enjoying the mechanics within them, and lets the sweatiest stuff at the absolute top be achieved by blending tribes and thinking outside the box. This allows the game to be playable all along the spectrum. We also care about this distinction because on the flip side, if one particular tribe was the best above all else, then even the best players would be forcing it. and that's what we're after. That brings us to the strongest that Quilboars have ever been, which came right after the package of Quilboar featuring Ground Shaker was released. Usually I don't refer to the specific B-roll of the cards I'm talking about specifically, but in this case, I want to talk about this game specifically that I'm showing here. It's hard to show an entire game in the B-roll of one tribe section, but I watched this whole game and it's remarkable that this worked as well as it did. Because the player is so low on life most of the game, he has to keep trying to be strong for the next round as his sole focus. Instead of stocking up or taking lines that make you weaker immediately but stronger in the long term, he couldn't afford to do that. All he could do was occasionally swap out a minion for a better one and try to find a few blood gems each turn to put on the Ground Shaker, which would buff his whole board with attack. That's it. That's all he could do. That's all he could afford to do. That's all he did. And he won the game. Having only like 10 attack or so from the blood gem board buff from Ground Shaker, and only one Ground Shaker, kept being enough for his minions to deal with his opponent's boards, including even a late game board that was benefited from divine shields given by George's hero power. This is like the most tame example of what's possible. It's a few blood gems and it's one Ground Shaker, and then hardly anything else even in the tribe at all. This just shows the power of a single Ground Shaker, let alone the ceiling of the entire tribe packed together all at one time, not to mention golden versions of those cards. The small stats, again, may not seem like much because Battlegrounds was a very different game 4 years ago, but this strategy was so much of a problem that after 8 days of the Quilboar tribe existing in Battlegrounds, the following Quilboar were nerfed. Roadboar, Prophet of the Boar, Bannerboar, Bristleback Brute, Dynamic Duo, Bonker, Charlga. All nerfed in a single patch to adjust power level of the Quilboar tribe. Quilboar's an absolutely incredible tribe if you ask me, just peak Battlegrounds gameplay. Up next, we have mechs. Mechs over the course of Battlegrounds history have gone from things like Junkbot, where you have just a few little mechs die, to something like a Kobold Guardian that eventually became a Deflecto bot, and you'd have 2 huge Deflecto bots as the core of the mech strategy for many, many years. You also have the magnetic keyword strategies to consider, like Moonsteel Juggernaut, which is something I have a personal love for. On top of all of that, Divine Shields, Magnetics, growing when mechs die, all sorts of stuff, you also have Omega Buster, which, quite frankly, they probably should have called Omega Busted because it was absurd. Perhaps you throw all of the comps out from all of the years that I've just mentioned, and perhaps you just pick Holy Mecharol as being such a good card that it, as its own comp, is the pick. Because if Combat RNG went your way, you essentially had infinite damage.
Stop. How does it keep happening? Stop, man, stop. Oh my god, it's actually ridiculous.
While something like that is funny, it's more so just an experience pain point than a TRS strategy. With all of this said, with all of the possible comps you could consider for mechs over the years, the pick today is actually none of those. And it may not even be something you've ever heard of or experienced before. That's actually true for me also, and I only ended up picking this tribe correctly due to help I received from other Battlegrounds players helping me research this to do this video well. The comp in question is Dr. Boombox combined with Kangaroo's Apprentice and Baron Rivendare. What is Dr. Boombox, you ask? Well, it's a originally tier 4 minion with 7 attack and 1 health that reads Death Rattle. Deals 7 damage to the 2 nearest enemy minions. And with something like a golden Dr. Boombox doing 14 twice, combined with Baron Rivendare or even golden Baron Rivendare, you're now dealing significant amounts of damage and summoning more boomboxes with Kangors to keep doing it. This is a comp that I hadn't heard of and hadn't experienced, and you probably haven't either, and the reason for that is after 1 month of this card existing, they nerfed it from tier 4 to tier 5. And after another month and a half, they decided that wasn't enough, and they removed the card from the pool of available minions in Battlegrounds, and he has never been seen since. This card only lasted from March 2023 to June 2023, and has been completely forgotten about since. The way the comp works is pretty simple. It's just like the Kaboombot card you probably have heard of, but on steroids. It's literally just get as many copies of Dr. Boombox and Baron Rivendare as you can, and then have at least one King War's Apprentice. That's the entire comp. And it obliterated everything. Entire boards would get wiped out by just a few Dr. Boomboxes dying with Baron Rivendares in play. And with Dr. Boombox releasing as a tier 4 minion, you could start building this strategy up super early by getting Boombox on 4, getting immediately strong tempo, and being able to hold him while you get to 5 to be able to get Baron Rivendare and King War's Apprentice, and you never need to go any higher. Not that you'd have time anyway, because if you actually are going to go to 6, it's just for the 1 extra minion in the tavern or the 1 extra damage to your opponent, because you've likely already won the game. This comp really just is simple on paper, but was just so overtuned, and it was quite fascinating for me to discover this for the first time. Absolutely the strongest the tribe has ever been, and I'm thankful that I was able to be made aware of this for this video. Up next, we have Beasts. This section, I'm sure, will surprise absolutely nobody, as the pick for this section revolves around a single minion. The minion in question is Leap Frogger. A tier 2 card is not only an entire comp, but was one of the strongest comps in Battlegrounds history, let alone for the Beast tribe. When Leap Frogger was printed, it read, Death Rattle, give a friendly beast +2/+2 and this Death Rattle. However, less than a month after it came out, in 2021, it was nerfed to give a friendly beast +1/+1 and this Death Rattle. And that is where it existed for the next 2 years. But even that nerf, even cutting its text on the actual Death Rattle in half, it did not kill this card, and the card only continued to get better and to dominate more, until eventually it had gotten so out of hand that they got rid of it in 2023. Interestingly enough, for whatever reason, they decided a year and a couple months later to bring it back at the end of 2024, only to then get rid of it less than 2 months later after people managed to get 5,000, 15,000, 130,000, 44 million billion stats on their beasts, and it became absurd. It's kind of like when in the wild format they reverted Kael'thas, a card known for blowing out games and winning on turn 1 and just being broken. They reverted it, and then it did exactly that again, and then they nerfed it again. It's like that, but the Battlegrounds version, where this card is broken, makes humongous boards, just absurdly large, relatively easily. They got rid of it, and then they're like, you know what, let's just bring it back. And then they're like, oh, that's why we got rid of it. The way the comp works outside of Leap Frogger giving that Death Rattle to other beasts is you can use cards like Titus Rivendare as well as Macaw to multiply the amount of Death Rattles that get applied to your other beasts. So Leap Frogger dies, and you have a couple of Titus Rivendares, or even just one, it doesn't just give one Death Rattle, it gives multiple. And then when your Macaw attacks, which triggers those Death Rattles, it then makes more Death Rattles, which multiply the amount of stats being given to each minion. So your first Death Rattle, simplified, is 2/2 to this minion plus Death Rattle. But then when Macaw attacks, it takes the 2/2 and it makes go to something twice, which then doubles to 4/4, becomes 16 plus 16, which becomes times 4, times 8, times 20, times a bajillion, right? It doesn't matter. We're just throwing numbers out there, but what you're seeing here is what it does, where it just very quickly gets extremely out of hand because it's exponentially getting larger every time the Death Rattle triggers, because the Death Rattles never go away, they only stack because your Titus and your Macaw add more every time, until eventually they die, but then you still have every single Death Rattle so long as there's a beast in play to take all of those Death Rattles. So you have beasts that summon things, you have Leap Frogger, you have Macaw, and you have Titus. That is the entire comp. And given that Leap Frogger is a tier 2 minion, the only difficulty with finding it was other people finding it first, taking them out of circulation. While it scales similar to Goldrin and most other beast strategies, where instead of kind of playing a lot of cards and scaling during the shopping phase, you're primarily just buying a few pieces and then doing all your scaling unpermanently in the combat phase, the difference it has with Goldrin is that it actually gets large enough to just be absurdly broken. We've never really seen, millions of stats on our beasts using Goldrins. Maybe there's an absurdly strong high roll out there, but that's not something you're seeing in most games, whereas here, you're getting 1,000 plus stats minions on your beasts consistently multiple years ago, when getting 1,000 stats on minions was pretty much unheard of. No reason to drag this section on any longer. I'm sure this isn't a surprise to many people. Leapfrogger, an absolutely bonkers card and an absolutely bonkers strategy, which is why it is a clear and easy pick for the strongest that the Beast tribe has ever been. If not beasts, then I think Murlocs are the easiest pick in this entire video. The pick for Murlocs is a board of Amalgadons. More specifically, a board full of Divine Shield and Poisonous Murlocs, which often featured or primarily showcased Amalgadon, so for the sake of this video, I'm going to call that whole board, in whichever way you see it, a full board of Divine Shield Poisonous as a board of Amalgadons. Now listen, I know what some of you smart Alex are saying to yourself right now. Well, hey, Amalgadon is an amalgam. It's an all-tribe minion. So a board full of Amalgadons is the strongest mech tribe comp of all time. It's the strongest beast comp of all time. It's the strongest pirate comp of all time. But let's just take a moment and kind of understand why we're assigning it to Murlocs, right? The biggest reason we're assigning it to Murlocs is Brand Bronzebeard and the way that naturally works with Primal Fin or Cold Light Seer, etc. Using Murloc generation for money, using Murloc battle cries for stats, and having that Brand Bronzebeard as a core part of Murlocs already allowed you to pick up a non-Murloc or two to then play temporarily, to then play your Amalgadon to get more adapts and to make it stronger. You can then keep that Brand Bronzebeard to buff your amalgams with other good battle cries to make them stronger with more adapts, as well as to buff them with more AoE full board effect battle cries. The second main reason, besides play pattern, which I think is enough on its own, is one of the main problem childs of the early Amalgadon years, Gentle Megasaur. This, I think, is another great response to the people who say, well, Amalgadon is in all tribes, so it should count for all or none of the tribes, because Gentle Megasaur isn't adapting your beasts, it's not adapting your pirates, it's adapting your Murlocs. So in the case of Gentle Megasaur, all we care about is that Amalgadon is a Murloc. While I have picked the kind of 2019 to 2021 era for this video as the time that I think Amalgadon was the strongest, given that it could reach the same ceiling of having a full board of Divine Shield Poisonous, in a time that there was a lower power level, there were other times where Amalgadon was really, really powerful as well, and one of the cards that helped in that era to create multiple, even a full board of Amalgadons is another card that we could use as an example to justify why we are including this as the Murlocs tribe. That card in question is Seafood Slinger, which was battle cry, make a Murloc golden. So you could use Seafood Slinger to golden the Amalgadon in the shop before buying it, or to golden the one in your tavern to prevent tripling your two Amalgadons in either situation, to then be able to get a third Amalgadon on your board. And if you keep doing that, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, etc., which would allow you to much more easily come across a full board of Amalgadons, because you don't need, 4 to get 2 board slots, you don't need 7 to get 3 board slots, etc. And that, again, much like Gentle Megasaur, only works on Murlocs. So with that all aside, there's really not much more to explain that you haven't already seen in the footage you are watching. You have insanely powerful minions with all the keywords, including Poisonous, which had to be removed because of how strong this card and sometimes this comp was. And you have Brand, Gentle Megasaur, even things like Cold Light Seer to continue to make more amalgams and to continue to make your amalgams stronger. Absolutely a no-brainer pick for the strongest that the Murloc tribe has ever been. Up next, we have Dragons. Dragons, you pretty much have 2 options even worth considering. You have Kalecgos, and you have during combat shenanigan things. The most notable during combat shenanigan things that I could find was Poet plus undead / dragon minion that would get a bunch of attack, and with Death Rattle give something a bunch of attack, which your poets would then keep or double and keep, and you'd have Divine Shield Dragons with a bajillion attack. And if you're not picking that comp, you're likely just gonna pick Kalecgos, which is what we are doing today. However, just picking Kalecgos, even in and of itself, wasn't that simple, because you have to figure out which time frame in Kalecgos' lifespan, which is like, the entirety of Battlegrounds essentially, was the best for Kalecgos. And to correctly pick the right time for Kalecgos, you must first understand the normal problem with the Kalecgos comp. You see, Kalecgos, for the most part, is a comp where if you get Brand Bronzebeard and 2 Kalecgos, you're probably going to win the lobby, and you're going to have a lot of fun doing so. But if you can't manage to get 2 Kalecgos and Bran, you would be unwise to commit to going Dragons or to going that comp at all, because you would likely kind of just die before you got over the hump where you had enough money to spend on enough battle cries to get large enough to start winning fights and outscaling everyone else in the lobby. So when looking for the right Kalecgos comp to find the strongest dragon comp of all time, you have to figure out which mid-game dragons sufficed you allowing yourself to get to Kalagos's with enough health to be able to assemble it and get online. And for that, I have found my pick. The time in question is when Kalagos Dragon Comp overlapped with the cards Herald of Flame and Prestor's Pyro Spawn. Herald of Flame, overkill, deal 3 damage to the leftmost enemy minion. This is something that allowed you to kill a minion and potentially shoot off or damage another minion, and Prestor Pyro Spawn allowed all of your dragons that you had to also deal 3 damage to its target on top of the attack of that dragon. These were mid-game dragons that provided you a lot of tempo, and in the case of Pyro Spawn, can actually be kept around even into the late game and can still provide insane value. Because while the 3 amount of damage falls off incredibly hard, it still 100% satisfies the condition of popping divine shields that your dragons are attacking into so that they can deal the full damage to their target. And these 2 cards were very frustrating to go against, and they allowed dragons to reach Kalagos, Nadina, Bran, etc. and then be unkillable. This allowed you to have a board of dragons already and life to then be able to acquire Kalagos's and add to it, instead of having to go from whatever you had to getting Kalagos's and other dragons at the same time. Another reason that this era of Kalagos was the best is because there weren't many counters to big builds at the time. So you have the mid-game survivability, you have the lack of counters to big builds, and then you have the ability to build a big board with Kalagos, and having Pyro Spawn as the cherry on top to counter any other people trying to make big boards with Divine Shields as well. And so the top of the meta was just Kalagos, Divine Shields, with a Pyro Spawn against your opponent that were doing the same thing, or they were losing. Kalagos, an iconic Battlegrounds card, and an easy choice for Dragon's strongest comp. Up next, Undead. Undead is actually one of the newer tribes to Battlegrounds coming out in early 2023. And that release date is significant because the choice for the best Undeads have ever been relative to the field is exactly that time frame. Undead on release was so broken that the term Undeadstone was coined to describe Battlegrounds at the time. The primary outlier for the comp was Eternal Night, but given the entire tribe was so bonkers, it was supplemented in many different ways, such as with Soul Splitter to give your Undeads Reborn, or Eternal Summoner to summon your Eternal Knights as they keep getting bigger. On top of that, if that wasn't what you ended up having, you could also have Titus and Anubarak for the more traditional undead attack scaling, as well as Sister Death Whisperer and the permanently scaling Avenge Binion patchwork in the back. Not only were there many options, but all of them stood out above the rest. But specifically to narrow it down, the pick today is the Eternal Night package, as that was the standout. You see, Eternal Night essentially reads exactly as it does today, but was competing in an era 3 years ago. In some cases, even better support than it has now. There's really not much to say about this other than to describe how Eternal Night works, which is that anytime an Eternal Night dies, every future Eternal Night is bigger, so it is scaling for free in combat. You don't have to do anything in the shop buying phase to scale. It just scales for you in combat. So much like a Beast tribe where you're just trying to get more pieces and trying to golden your minions to have big fight stats, you're also growing those stats passively. So you're growing and you're just looking for goldens. It's the best of both worlds at a time that the power level wasn't nearly as high. A pretty easy pick here. Undead's extremely broken when it released. Similar to Quillboars, when you release something, you run the risk of it being too good because you want it to be slightly better than the rest so that people are excited to give it a shot and not feel like they need to do other things in order to win games. Which is why Eternal Night Undeadstone, an easy pick for the strongest that Undeads have ever been. Up next, Demons. Demons feels like a good time to mention that not all tribes are designed in the same way. And I don't just mean from like the keywords they use or the type of gameplay that they have, but what I mean is that there are certain tribes that are better at getting first places, even if the trade-off means a lot of 8th places, and there are some tribes that are really, really good at getting that 3rd and 4th spot placement for positive MMR. And in this case, Demons falls in that 2nd bucket. So when I went looking for the best demon comp that, would get first all the time and was like the TRS of the meta, I realized there weren't very many options. So with all that said, I've decided to split this section into 2 different picks. One, the best pick, the best demon comp in question when it comes to getting first places and just having absurd boards that were unbeatable by anything else in the game. And the second option being, if you played this comp, one of the historically strongest comps demons have seen, you were just like basically guaranteed second place, basically as your floor and as your ceiling. Our pick for the one that wins a lot, regardless of maybe the 8th place trade-offs, is a demon comp revolving around Baddie Tarot Guard, Fellfire Conjurer, and Shadow Dancer. The way it works is simple. You use a card like Fellfire Conjurer to buff your Tavern Spells' abilities, and you use Shadow Dancer, and ideally Titus Rivendare, to add a Tavern spell to your hand that then, when played, adds stats, permanent stats, to the minions in the shop. Not only do you buff the shop when you play these tavern spells, but if you have Baddie Tarot Guard in play, you also consume minions from the tavern to gain their stats permanently on your minions. So you have a perfect round, well-oiled machine where you're getting spells that buff your shop, and when you play the spells that buff your shop, you have another minion that eats those minions from the shops, and you just rinse and repeat, getting absurdly large shops, and as a result, absurdly large boards. This comp was so good at its peak that it would make the entire lobby lag. The entire server and world you were in while you were in a Battlegrounds game would be brought to its crumbling knees in lag for everybody, not just the demon player, because the shop and the board got so big that for whatever reason, the game just couldn't handle it.
I would play these, but I just can't, right? Like, dear God, man, I love this game, right? But this is the only thing that I really, really, really hate about it. It's so annoying.
Much like Pirates, the biggest weakness was dying before getting it online and having some sort of tempo in the mid-game. Outside of like trinket shenanigans, this might not only be the best demons have ever been versus the field in terms of getting first places, but also the biggest numbers the tribe has consistently hit. This isn't the most nostalgic option, but the scaling from a large shop consistently outscales basically anything Battlegrounds has ever seen. It wouldn't be right to talk about demons without talking about its reign from 2019 to 2021 in the early years of Battlegrounds. In late 2019, the card Floating Watcher was added to Battlegrounds, and it combined with Wrathweaver was the comp in question that just dominated the early and mid game, so much so that you were guaranteed basically to be one of the top 4 left, and depending on your luck and proficiency with it, you were able to sneak out 3 and 2 pretty often, and not at the top MMRs, probably first a lot of times, if we're honest, right? This comp was really good. The way it works, very simple. Floating Watcher says, whenever your hero takes damage, gain 2/2. So when you play a demon, your Wrathweaver triggers gaining stats, which hurts your hero, which triggers your Floating Watchers, giving them stats. And in the early games of Battlegrounds, cycling 3 minions to provide your board with some stats was essentially all you were doing. You weren't going infinite, you weren't having tons of different options. It was pretty much just like buy 3 or 4 minions if you had 10 gold, selling them to get 1 back, and like getting a few effective battle cries or picking up a piece or 2 for your comp. That's kind of it. So having a comp where you can have, 2 Wrathweavers or Golden Wrathweaver and 2 Floating Watchers or Golden Floating Watcher, allowing those minions to gain stats while just playing any demon was not only a consistent, like half your board scaling, but it allowed you to get huge stats really easily and really consistently because there's pretty much always at least 1 demon in the shop. This is probably the most, outside of Soul Juggler, and maybe even then, this is probably the most nostalgic demon comp in all of Battlegrounds, and there's good reason for that. This comp dominated the pre-damage cap metas, and it's forever stuck in a lot of our minds, just the dread of facing an early game humongous demon board and just having nothing you can do but take 10 to 20 damage and just suck it up. An absolute masterclass in terms of just printing MMR, which is why I've chosen it as one of the best, if not the best, demon comp of all time.
I think we might win this one.
In the same vein that demons are kind of more programmed to get high placement rather than high finishes, we have the complete polar opposite of that in the Pirates tribe. Pirates as a tribe excel at having comps where you could go infinite and you could reach insanely high ceilings, but Trying to do so will almost certainly result in you getting 8th place about as often as you get 1st place. So when I looked for pirate comps and strategies that were the tier S top dog, much like demons, it was actually quite difficult because pirates over the course of Hearthstone history have never really been that, quite frankly, at all. It was always something you would, if powerful enough and if lucky enough, switch to be able to get over the hump and be in that infinite state to scale. Or in the modern day, it'd be something you'd kind of start going toward to get infinite money to then switch to something else that provided better scaling. Because pirates are the money tribe. And in, the earlier days, if you managed to get enough money to essentially go infinite, you were able to get the stats to beat other comps because other comps weren't doing as powerful things as they are in the modern day. And so then in the modern day, once you get the gold, you have to switch to other things to be able to get the stats. So in either situation, pirates as a tribe aren't necessarily the top dog. Outside of the APM, kind of trying to go infinite comps, you have the scallywag type comps, which are similar to beasts, where you kind of build out your different combo pieces on the board. You try to assemble some sort of Exodia that goes crazy during the combat. And while we have seen some different Exodia builds over the time of Pirate's lifespan, they're never quite actually as good as the APM stuff, because they're just as likely to fall apart and die, and their ceilings are not as high. Obviously, Scallywag Eliza have had their time, and they've had some really good lists with them, especially kind of recently with the Bone Render shenanigans that led to that getting nerfed and kind of the extremely weird and technical intricacies of that. But ultimately, it's not the pick today. The pick today is going to be APM Infinite Pirates, and much like Dragons and Caligos, we just kind of have to figure out which era we think does best. And after considering all of them, I've realized that they're all, much like I said earlier, essentially the same. Any APM comp relative to the field is pretty much the same. They all work as the answer to this question, so I have chosen APM Hogger as my choice. For those who don't know, Captain Hogger reads, when you buy a pirate, gain 1 gold. It existed that way for almost 2 years before being removed from Battlegrounds, and then actually changed to be a tier 6 minion, despite not being in the game, which I find quite interesting anytime I see that. The way this comp worked was very simple. Much like any infinite pirate comp, you would try to get your hoggers. You would try to get some way that scales by spending your money. You can use things like Balladus once you spend a lot of money to give a lot of stats as well. Whatever your method of choice was, Hogger allowed you to more easily assemble gold than in other eras of APM pirates. As soon as you got one of these online, you got a 1 gold discount on every pirate, which meant every pirate only cost 1 money to buy and sell, which would then trigger all of your things that triggered when you spent gold, giving you stats and potentially giving you money back without having to actually spend that much money in a net gain versus a net loss. And as soon as you find another Hogger, right, because that's only 1 tier 5 minion, once you find 2 of them, you are now buying a pirate for 3, selling it, getting 2 gold back, and getting the 1 gold back for selling it to the shop. So you're recycling for free. And so now all you have to worry about is the money it takes to roll. But because of Hogger, you're able to get that gold more easily, and you're able to outscale using that gold more easily than other periods. So that's kind of the focus here, more so than how you scale. Even though this period still had the same struggles, Hogger is both nostalgic and iconic. If you have a different APM pick, I totally get it. But anyway, APM Pirates, easily the strongest pick. And due to its nostalgic elements, as well as maybe its accessibility and knowing hey, I need to get this so I can get money, it kind of taught you to play pirates in the right way. Because some people just keep going for stats with pirates, and they don't realize you have to get the money online first. You have to get the money generators first. APM Hogger, my pick for the strongest that pirates have ever been. On May 10th, 2022, the Naga tribe was added to Hearthstone Battlegrounds. And fresh off the press, it was extremely busted. The primary problem child cards were Tide Mistress, Atiza, Storm Scale Siren, as well as cards like Norgoza the Tender. Obviously, they released an entire tribe, but primarily those were the cards in question that would either scale or give you the money to scale, and were standout for their tavern tiers. Tide Mistress has gone through many iterations, but on release read, after you cast a spell, give 4 friendly Naga +1 and +1. And had 8 health. 9 days after it was printed, it was nerfed to say after you cast a spell, give 3 friendly Nagas 1/1, and was nerfed all the way down to 3 health. Storm Scale Siren, when it was added, said, at the end of your turn, your spellcraft minions cast their spells on themselves, and was a Tavern 3 minion. 9 days after it was added, in that same patch, it was also nerfed, not just losing a little bit of health or a little bit on its text, but instead going from Tavern Tier 3 all the way to Tavern Tier 5. And Orgozoa the Tender had its stats nerfed from 5.9 to 3.7. Obviously, there were other cards nerfed. There were lots of Nagas nerfed, but we don't have time to talk about all of them. Those are some of the standouts, but much like Undead's, the entire tribe was absolutely broken. Going and looking at some of these videos from 3 years ago, I'm seeing comments like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm really digging the play Naga or get hit for 28 on turn 9 by the guy who is meta, which is absolutely hilarious. There were other ones talking about how even post-nerf, after that 9-day later patch, the power level was still on the level of release Quilboar, which is an interesting thing to see them comparing this many years later, as we talked earlier in the video about how busted Quilboar were on release. In this first footage, pre-nerf, the idea behind the video is that it's the last broken Naga game before, you know, the huge patch to bring them lower. In reality, they were still really busted. But ultimately, the way the comp works and the reason it had to be nerfed is this. Tide Mistress Atissa, when you'd play your spellcraft spells, you would buff your board of Nagas, or 4 of them anyway. And then Stormscale Siren would trigger all of your spellcrafts at the end of turn, which would have your spellcraft minions cast their spellcraft on themselves, and those casts from the Stormscale Siren would trigger your Atissa. Whether you kept the tier 2 Naga around that kept the spellcast permanently, whether you kept something like Illiboned Archer around to get attack, whether you kept Glow Scale around to get Divine Shield, it didn't really matter. You just had Atissa. As many as you could, you had Stormscale Sirens and Spellcraft Minions to get a bunch of spells, and then you spent your money getting more spells. Until eventually you had a huge board full of Nagas that gave you spellcrafts to keep doing it. And Orgoza not only gave you money via a Naga from your spellcraft every turn, but that spellcraft itself was also a spell. So you're getting a spell and a Naga, which often has a spell on top of it. So it was just a lot of value generation, a lot of spells, and a lot of stats. We've seen other Naga strategies evolving spellcraft and Atissa and growing, but having it perform this well and be this strong 3 years ago, it is a clear pick for the strongest that the Naga tribe has ever been. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe. I don't know if it's clear while watching the video, but this one took a little bit longer to make than normal, so I hope that you like it, and I hope that the extra effort was appreciated. If not, no biggies, I'll move on to the next one either way. Here's a video YouTube thinks you'll enjoy. Click it. Click it now.